anything else. You're not doing anything. I don't understand why you would just stop using your cell phone at 2 o'clock on Saturday and then never use it again, even though you allegedly went to bed, were sleeping, woke up, and went for this bike ride.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because it's probably, when she was murdered in that time frame. And that's the first thing that we have to figure out is a timeline on these cases. It's the biggest thing. It's where we start. And there's just so many odd facts in this case. Who has tranquilizer darts, hanging around in their house? It's just a very puzzling case. And there's a lot of pieces to it. And it's trouble.
I think we're having some trouble with Lauren's signal right now, so we'll check on that in a second. Joseph Scott Morgan, I look at this case, and it's not going to be easy. What are your thoughts with the location of where the remains are found, and it's years later? I don't think you'll be able to get much information from these remains. To me, it almost complicates the case here.
Yeah, it does. But, there's a lot that we can learn from this location. First off, who in Suzanne's circle, and remember, they didn't have a huge circle there in Colorado, who would have knowledge of this specific location that would also have enough anger to take her out there? And remember, they've used the term shallow grave. Then a shallow grave implies that's an action phrase, because a grave, in order to be shallow, can only be dug to a certain depth. That implies to me a certain pace, rapid, and the soil out here is very, very compact. Did the individual that created the shallow grave not show up with the appropriate tools? In order to dig into this type of dirt out there, you would need to show up with certainly a pickaxe, perhaps, if you're going to go deep, and obviously a shovel. How defined were these margins that were out here? And one of the things that's troubling to me, I think, is that not only did they use the term shallow grave, but correct me if I'm wrong, feel free to. One of the initial reports that came out, I heard the term 75-yard radius relative to disbursement of remains. So that means that this is disturbed ground, that something has come into this environment and has dispersed the remains. But what's important here, I think, is the fact that there was a very quick ID then. You're going to have, I think, at least a partial skull because they were able to do a dental identification on Suzanne's remains very quickly. And that's going to play into this. Of course, I would imagine that when this case first occurred, one of the first things that they went looking for when they realized that this was not going to turn out well is they had already subpoenaed those dental remains. They had them sitting. They were there in standby. Somebody was holding on to these things because you don't get a turnaround quite that quickly. Right now, I think that we're still waiting for more information to come in. But if you have animals that have come to this grave to disperse the remains are not going to be in a pristine shape, man. So soft tissue damage is not going to be that appreciable over a 3-year period, particularly if you have scavengers that are out there. The one hope I would have, I think, if you're trying to determine a cause of death, is going to be some type of impact trauma, perhaps to the skull, where either a skull fracture or perhaps some type of gunplay that has been involved. Other than that, I think that you're really going to be grasping at straws. I think the biggest question I've had asked of me, Ben, and it always happens with cases like this, is will they find the hyoid? When you have fragile remains like this, the hyoid bone high up in the neck is one of the first things that disappear. I always teach my students, the smaller the bone in the body, the less likelihood there is of recovery of it. We're talking about small bones of the hands, of the feet, certainly vertebral bodies in many cases, but particularly like the hyoid bone. It's that one unarticulated bone in the body. It disappears pretty quickly.
All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, Carol McKinley, Lauren Vellucci staying with us for the whole hour. When we come back, We're going to take a look at some of the DNA that was left behind, was discovered in this case. Who does it help? What does it tell us? Plus, coming up next hour.